We often talk about underrated players on this podcast, guys that should go to the Pro Bowl, but don't get the national recognition for what they do, or in some cases, guys that are all pro caliber that really don't get the recognition for what they do. I can't remember the last time we actually did an episode dedicated to that. So a little bit of a short and sweet show today in the interest of letting our editors have time to go see their family this week. So ideally, this is going to be like a half-hour show. I'm picking two underrated players that I think should get more attention, but don't. EJ's picking two underrated players that should get more attention, but don't. And we kind of came together to pick a coach that should get more recognition for what he does, or has done, or actively is doing, but has kind of fallen under the radar. But before we get into it, EJ, my friend, how are you?
I'm good. We get to dig into some of those presents that are sort of stuffed behind the tree, the smaller ones that maybe aren't the big first one that you open. They don't splash across the headlines necessarily, but all these guys are making contributions to their team. Some of them more down the stretch. Some of them have been doing it all along, but there's always players and coaches to focus on in these late season games, whether the team is contending or not, that are really making a push to set themselves up. And then when they explode next year, everybody goes, oh, how could you have possibly known? Well, if you paid attention to the end of the season and basically the resumes that they're all putting on film, the coaches and the players, you would have known. So our attempt to bring some Christmas presents to you that you can wow your friends, family, and possibly fantasy football draft mates with. And let our editors go home and enjoy the holiday too.
Before we get going in the show, I do want to thank Underdog Fantasy for making this show possible and every show possible that we've done this year and will do through the end of draft season. Obviously, we do our pick'ems every single week, and I know a lot of you guys have followed along with those and ideally been more successful than I have. EJ tells me not to rely on kickers, and I keep making that mistake. But one day I will learn my lesson. But if you would like to get into pick'ems, as we go down this home stretch here and, get into playoff games, now that we have a lot more data, and you're also probably better at it than I am, you will get a new depositor pick'em special virtually every single day on Underdog, depending on when you see this and when you sign up. So if you see this on Tuesday or Wednesday, Patrick Mahomes is going to be your new customer free pick. Thursday and Friday is going to be LeBron James. All weekend is going to be Tua, and then on Monday is going to be Brock Purdy. So you have a lot of options before you, depending on when you see this show. But there's pick'ems every single day. There's football damn near every single day this time of year, which is great. Basketball's going on, hockey, like pretty much anything you can think of. So again, thank you to Underdog for rocking with us this entire year and making this whole show possible. They're our favorite partner for a reason. Reminder, if you use promo code BOOTLEG, you get up to $1,000 in deposit bonuses as well, not just those new customer free picks. So check that out at the QR code on the screen or the link in the description below. Now, EJ, we did not tell each other who our two underrated players are leading into this, so I have no idea who you're going to say. Who is your first underrated, shall we call it a bootleg gem? Does that count?
I thought about that as I was doing this. I thought, well, there's an element to this, which is like pro gems. So yeah, but in terms of not telling each other, you don't tell each other what your Christmas presents are. Of course we didn't. My first one is a player that is on a high profile team that is contending and is surrounded by even higher profile players. And I think that dims his star a little bit and a little bit unfairly. And it is Milton Williams, defensive line, Philadelphia. Came out of Louisiana Tech in 21, has had a solid career, but this year things have really taken off for him. And he's often overshadowed by those more high-profile line mates largely because how he likes to collect those gems for his gauntlet and usually in the high rounds. So Milton Williams hasn't necessarily had that shine, but over the last 5 games, and again, as we're talking about this, it's this acceleration in the late season that really sort of piques my interest and makes my ears prick up and go, okay, is this guy really hitting his stride in a certain way? Over the last 5 games, he's racked up 24 pressures, 19 hurries, 3 hits, 2 sacks. He's third in the league for the season in PFF's PRP rate, which is pressure percentage rate. He is tearing it up. He's playing the run pretty well. He doesn't have as many run statistics. This is where film comes in because he doesn't have a ton of stops, but he does play interior defensive line. So a lot of it is about bottling up gaps and pressing that out to other defenders so that they can clean up their responsibilities and make tackles. Milton Williams is one of those players that, again, is surrounded by people more famous than him, who, in a lot of ways, when you watch the film, in a lot of stretches in games, is the straw that's stirring the drink on Philadelphia's defensive line a lot of times. And I don't think people would attach that label to him. So I'm going to put the tag on him and say he's my underappreciated player number one.
I remember when he was coming out, and he was an early third rounder with a 9.96 RAS. Right. And I'm going to read off some numbers for you because he was like that annual, like, oh, he's got the Aaron Donald profile. If he puts it all together, he can be like an Aaron Donald type, which nobody has ever actually done other than Aaron Donald. But you know, like he had like the crazy athleticism score, 6'3", 285, 34 in the bench, 38.5 vert, 10-1 in the broad, 4.67, 41, 6.5, 10 yards split. And a 3-cone, again, at 285 of 6.96. So he had that coveted sub-7 3-cone. Like, that is a ridiculous athletic profile. And it took him a little bit to get going, right? But he's clearly arrived at this point, and he's kind of weaponizing all that athleticism now that he knows how to use it. And to be on a defensive line with Jalen Carter and, you know, BG before he got hurt and Sweat. I mean, it's just a loaded group, right? But to be on that front and still be productive without everybody else kind of just vacuuming up all the stats, like that kind of tells you how good he is. I don't know when is he was a 2021 draft pick, so I think he's due to be a free agent. I think. Off the top of my
third
head.
rounder, he's coming. They're gonna have to look at the contract one way or another.
I don't know what he's gonna get in free agency, but it ain't gonna be a small contract if I had to guess, because he is an ascending athletic freak on the interior D line. And how often do ascending athletic freaks on the interior D line not get paid a lot of money? Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of a rare instance. My first, I'm just gonna call it a gem.
Okay.
my first underrated gem. He's going to be Blake Cashman. And we've talked about him actually a couple times already. Yep. We talked about him in the summer series when we brought up that they brought him. I think he's an Eden Prairie kid, right? You know, so he went home to Minnesota and he was great in Houston. I thought he was really good with the Jets and just inexplicably somehow didn't work out there. The Jets have a habit of having really good linebackers and then not keeping them for whatever reason. But he went home to Minnesota, and I remember in the summer series, we're like, this is going to be a really, really solid pickup for them. It's been more than solid. Like, he has literally been the engine of this defense as far as productivity, and honestly, as far as structure goes. Like, the style of defense that Flo calls with all these two deep fire zones, you know, whether it's whether we're playing quads or whether we're playing palms behind it, you know, if you're playing these two deep fire zones, there's so much space underneath, and you need linebackers that know how to operate in that much space, or else it all falls apart. And he missed, you know, a 3-game stretch in the middle of the season. And in that 3-game stretch, they were 27th in EPA per play against. They were 14th in success rate allowed. They were 30th in conversion rate allowed. Yes, it was against Detroit and it was against the Rams. I understand that. But if you're looking at all the games he's played, they're first in EPA per play allowed, third in success rate allowed, and first in conversion rate allowed. So playing against Detroit and playing against the Rams doesn't account for a 27 to 30 spot drop in all of the main macro defensive statistics that matter, right? Like, he is an incredibly important piece of this defense because it feels like he's the only one on the team that knows how to be like a good hook dropper in space. You know, Metellus, God bless him, he's tried. It's been okay when he's been asked to be a linebacker. He's survived, but he's not a linebacker as much as they want to pretend that he is. And Ivan is great going forward, not so much going backwards. And so like Cashman, when he's out there, specifically what he does in zone coverage is what makes these coverages work, which in turn is what makes their blitzes work. It's what makes, or at least when Ivan's healthy, it's what allowed him to be as good and as free of a blitzer because the coverage on the back end was so sound. And Metellus, when he's playing safety or when he's playing nickel, which to me is his better spot, like when Cashman is at linebacker and you can put Metellus somewhere else, like that's what makes Metellus better. So like looking at this Vikings defense that is top 3, pretty much any way you slice it, it's rare to see a system completely fall apart when they don't have a linebacker in place. They're one of the teams that falls apart when Blake Cashman's not on the field. Again, I understand Detroit's really good and the Rams are really good, and they probably still would have put up some points. They would not have gotten eviscerated like that if Cashman was on the field. So to me, very underrated player. He is what makes that team work defensively. Obviously, Darnold is what makes them work offensively. And as long as he stays healthy, they have a shot in the playoffs. If he gets hurt again, they might be sunk. And that is a rare thing to say about a linebacker.
Especially an interior linebacker, and Cashman is the glue guy on that defense because of what he does and what he knows. There are not very many safe bets in the NFL, but a safer than average bet, if that's a thing, is a linebacker being imported to Flores's defense because A, he had a say in it, and B, he knows exactly what he's going to do with that guy. He got him for a reason. Cashman, he got for several reasons. And it has worked out exactly that way. And like you said, when he's in there, it's a different defense. And it would be one of those really underappreciated losses if you went down in the playoffs that would kind of sink a lot of what they do. And they're going to be facing more potent offenses as they get into the playoffs on the regular. So they're not going to be able to afford it because one and done in the NFL playoffs. It reminds me a little bit of the corner for the Chargers a couple of years ago that was the guy they relied on for one role.
Michael Davis.
And he got hurt.
Press corner.
And that was that. All of a sudden, it's kind of like taking the bottom block of the foundation out and going, we'll hold it up. But if you're facing really good teams, that's not going to work. And Cashman would be that kind of loss.
All right. Who's your second gem? Up here.
My second underrated gem is a guy that has really accelerated in the second half of the season, and it speaks to a really interesting trend right now in the NFL, so I thought it was worth bringing up, and that's Chase Brown, the running back for Cincinnati. Came out of Illinois in 23. We talked at length in the beginning of the season, you being a Texans fan, about how much of a difference Joe Mixon made for the Texans and how big of a loss that was for the Bengals. Chase Brown was the heir apparent. He was the guy they drafted fairly highly for a running back to be that replacement with a lot of speed. The only knock on him was really fumbling, and that reared its head in his rookie season, whatever else. The first part of the season, he was, I'll call it quiet. He was good, but he was quiet. Over the last 5 games, he's been anything but. 353 rushing yards at 4.2 per, 3 rushing TDs. But the thing about Chase Brown is he's a really good receiver too. He's also racked up 220 yards receiving at 8.7 per and added 2 more receiving TDs. So that's 573 total yards and 5 touchdowns over the last 5 games. He is absolutely hitting his stride. He is understanding his role in that offense. Most notably, he's only had 1 fumble in that time. That's really important. That was the big knock on him coming out, was ball security. And since then, you're seeing the explosion. And it's the trend I was talking about in the intro here is youth versus experience at running back. And I think experience serves better early on in the season and sometimes in the playoffs if they've been able to keep legs fresh on the veterans. When youth is served is really this second half of the season when they figure it out. They've got fresh legs. There's more explosion. It's a young man's position in the NFL. It always has been. It's a mileage position. And outside of absolute aliens like Derrick Henry, who just keep on trucking 10, 11 years into this with the heaviest workload you can imagine, it is good for offenses to upgrade to those fresh legs. Chase Brown has been that and more over the last month, and it portends really well for this Bengals offense, not only going down the stretch, because that's not so important for this particular team, but heading into next year, they know they've got their guy at running back, and they can count on that.
We're talking about a running back here that's only started 9 games so far this year, and he's almost at 1,000 yards. So incredibly impressive production. We all knew he was an ultra explosive athlete. He could catch the ball super well. Like you mentioned, the one thing was fumbles. I think he led all of college football in fumbles over like a 2-year period. And it was double digits.
He was really close. There's a lot of players in college football, but in terms of the rate he fumbled at, it was disturbing. It was the red mark on his resume.
But that was just the one thing he had to fix, right? It's kind of like a quarterback that can't throw a fade. It's like, well, once he learns how to do the thing that he really should learn how to do as a professional, then he's going to be a great, X. And he learned how to stop fumbling. So credit to him, because then all of his other actual positive traits started to shine through, like his tackle breaking ability, his long speed, his short area burst, his hands. Like, it was literally just, hey, stop turning the ball over and you're going to be a really good NFL player. And then he stopped turning the ball over. It's a Christmas miracle, EJ. So congrats to him. Again, he worked on ball security, ended up being a really good pick for Cincy. At times, I really do think that Cincy had missed Joe Mixon this year, especially in the first stretch of the season, because they didn't have, that dynamism in the backfield that could just make something out of nothing, make a guy miss and get a first down anyway. Well, Chase Brown has been that for them, since he kind of took over that lead back role. I don't know why it took them so long to try it out. Especially with how the early season had gone for Cincy. It's like, you're losing games. Like, try everything. Like, you have this young, explosive kid in the backfield. Like, it's not like you're going to lose any more than you already are. So it took them a little bit too long for them to kind of go to the Chase Brown experience, in my opinion. But I'm glad they finally did. Really, really good young player. And I'd imagine in fantasy next year, he's going to be one of those like second, third round running backs that everybody thinks they're sneaky for drafting, but everybody wants them. My second player on the docket here, second gem. Keeping it on the offense, but I'm going to go with offensive line. And this is a young player, was drafted in 2022. I want to say in the second round. And he has been consistently overshadowed over the last 2 years by one of the only players that I think is literally capable of overshadowing him, and that's Tristan Wirfs. I'm talking about Luke Goedeke, obviously. For anybody who's not a Bucs fan, all the Bucs fans are like, he's talking about Luke Goedeke. Everybody else is like, who the fuck is Luke Goedeke? Trust me, Luke Goedeke, one of the best tackles in the NFL. Again, he's only not talked about because he plays on the same offensive line as Tristan Wirfs. But we're talking about one of the 10 best OTs in the game. And as far as right tackles go, one of the 3 best right tackles in the NFL. Not just this year, but last year. Started out as a guard, didn't go well. Like, he played tackle. Well, first he played tight end. Then they converted him to tackle at CMU. Then they tried to make him a guard. Didn't work out at all. So they moved him out to tackle. And he was good last year. He's been phenomenal this year. And if you're looking at just pressure percentage allowed, which is like the stat of all stats for offensive tackles, right? There are only 83 tackles in the NFL this year that have at least 150 pass blocking snaps. Tristan Wirfs is number 1 in pressure percentage allowed because he's Tristan Wirfs. Luke Goedeke's 8th. So the Bucs have 2 top 8 tackles in the NFL. Wirfs is at like 1.8%. Goedeke's at 3.3%, which is the same as Laramie Tunsil. So your right tackle in Tampa Bay is as good as Laramie Tunsil. That is unreal. And again, he doesn't get any credit. He doesn't get any publicity because of who plays on the other side. And there's so many other stars in Tampa Bay that get more ink, whether it's Baker, whether it's the running backs, whether it's Mike Evans, the ageless Levante David. But Luke Goedeke has literally been one of the 3 best players on the team this year. Like, he is an incredible offensive tackle. Ironically, we're recording this the day after he had his first kind of sort of shaky game of the entire year because Micah Parsons got him 3 times on 27 pass blocking snaps. But it's Micah Parsons. Like, he's going to win some too. He's about to make $35 million. But Goedeke, in his third year in the league, a former tight end who hasn't been playing tackle that long, has given up an average leading up to that game of 1 pressure per game. Like, that is unreal. He is an unreal draft hit for Tampa. You know how many teams are spending top 5, top 10 picks on tackles, hoping they get something that's 80% as good as that? And Tampa got him in the second round. So Goedeke, Pro Bowl tackle. He would be an all-pro candidate if there didn't happen to be 2 right tackles in his own conference that happened to be better than him. But again, we're talking about a top 3 right tackle in the NFL playing next to a top 3 left tackle in the NFL. Like, no wonder Baker had so much time back there. Like, that is ridiculous pass protection down in Tampa. Like, I can't put into words how incredible it was that Dallas even won that game last night against an offensive line that good.
The beneficiaries are Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield, and they are the ones that get talked about more. Goedeke gets talked about the least of all the players and coaches we've mentioned. Coming into the league, his profile was, I would say, a little bit muddy. It was muddy for me. I wasn't sure guard or tackle. I can't remember which bucket I put him in. Didn't really matter. I was like, he's going to have to settle in. It's going to be one of those try it and figure it out type things. And Tampa Bay tried it and figured it out. And the luxury that you brought up of having 2 top 10 players at any position, I don't care whether it's wide receiver or corner or tackle or inside linebacker, is a tremendous benefit. There are 32 teams in the league. And if you have 2 top 10 guys, it's an embarrassment of riches. The fact that happens in a position that is, I don't want to say bereft of talent because that's not fair. There's always a need for offensive line and quality offensive line played, and the need is much greater than the supply. And to be a team that can sit back and say, hey, we're pretty sure we can single up our tackles on just about anybody in the league. Yes, you mentioned Micah Parsons. I wouldn't say he's one of one, but he's like one of 5 maybe in the league that you can't do that against. Other than that, for 15 or 16 other games a year, you're going in going, no, we don't have to support this guy at all. And we know we're going to get time. We know we're going to get protection. We know that 80 to 85% of those plays are going to go off without a hitch. Is an immense luxury. Most teams are not anywhere close to that. The Bucs are. You've seen the results. You've seen Baker's results. A lot of those boil down to his tackles and, quite frankly, the center as well. It is a continuation of a really good tradition in Tampa Bay of very solid offensive line play that was established. We were a little worried. The offensive line coach was leaving. He was going to Carolina. We were happy for Carolina. We were a little worried about Tampa Bay with a drop-off. Hasn't been the case. They've been extremely solid. Goedeke's a huge part of that.
Well, speaking of coaches going to Carolina and me and EJ being kind of worried about what that's going to mean, that is a pretty good segue into our joint pick for underrated gem of a coach, right? And we wanted to pick one together that truly doesn't get the credit they deserve. Like, I know a lot of fans think that their coach doesn't get the credit they deserve. And looking at you, Vikings fans, are like, why aren't we talking more about Kevin O'Connell? We are. He's going to win Coach of the Year. Like, we're talking about Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell and Matt LaFleur and, insert NFC coach here. Like, trust me, we're talking about them. But there is one coach that we legitimately don't talk about, and that's Dave Canales. I get it. The team is not great overall. Their win-loss record is going to be, bottom 5 in the league. But I wanted to bring him up specifically, and we also kind of chose this topic for Dave Canales specifically. If you're looking at his resume over the last 4 years, he helped resurrect Geno Smith in Seattle. He kind of picked up the baton from Sean McVay, who had started the Baker Mayfield resurrection in LA, and he took that baton and ran with it in Tampa and helped Baker have such a good 2023 that he then signed a very lucrative contract. And then, of course, Liam Cohen came in and was like, okay, let's just do that, but more. And so now Baker's going to be a Pro Bowler this year and maybe possibly lead them to the playoffs. We'll see. Like, again, that loss to Dallas was brutal for them, but it's still not impossible that they make the playoffs. They just need something to break their way. But either way, Canales played a major role in the Baker Mayfield resurrection arc. So he had those two under his belt. Then he goes to Carolina. Bryce Young started out, bottom of the barrel as far as shakiness, as far as lacking confidence, wasn't accurate, just had zero pocket presence to speak of. It was bad. And he got benched. And we're like, wow, is that the end of Bryce Young? But I'll be damned. Dave Canales, a few weeks later, Bryce Young comes back. Obviously the Andy Dalton car accident played into that. But Bryce Young comes back. And since that point where he has come back on the field, he has been a legitimate starting quarterback. And I don't know what Canales did while Young was on the bench. Like, I have no clue. And maybe the early season shakiness was just because he didn't really have a preseason. Like, you could argue that was a mistake and he should have done more in the preseason. But whatever Dave did in that little gap to get Bryce Young back into a positive mindset where he looks like he's having fun playing the sport again. He looks like he's at ease. He doesn't wilt under pressure anymore. He's been accurate. He's thrown with touch and timing and anticipation. Obviously, he's still not driving the ball down the field, but he's never really been a guy who drives the ball down the field. He's been more of a C-space, attack space kind of guy. And if you're looking at, some of these plays against Arizona yesterday, like getting drilled, like linebackers in his face, and he's like, I know where my space is going to be. Let me just put the ball there. I'm going to trust my receiver to go get it. Like, some of these throws, Bryce Young was not going to make in the first month of the season. He just wasn't. And Canales got him to the point where he's doing it again. He's doing the Bama Bryce stuff again. So credit to Dave Canales for whatever the hell he does that gets these quarterbacks that are down on their luck, that don't have confidence, that don't even look like they're having fun playing the sport. And he gets them back into a mindset where they can be a productive quarterback. I don't know if it's a scheme thing or what, but as far as mindset, like I don't know any other coach in the league that is better at like the sports psychology part of being a head coach, because this is just remarkable what he's done.
Unbelievable pressure cooker, and the fact that we're talking about it for the third straight time. I don't know what he did with Geno Smith, but Geno Smith looks really capable. Like, hint, hint, he might be a top 10 quarterback under the time he was working with Dave Canales. He goes to Tampa Bay. Yeah, Baker looks like he was having a little bit more fun and he was letting it go in LA, but let's be honest, Baker was the book on Baker Mayfield at that point. All of a sudden, Baker stops being bad Baker, starts being good Baker almost all the time, signs a contract extension, goes to Carolina. It's not just Bryce. It was definitely Bryce. Bryce was absolutely at the low ebb of his football career. He looked completely lost. And I'm not talking about one thing he couldn't do or, one thing that was going wrong for him. It was all going wrong. If you watched late season Bryce last year or early season Bryce this year, everything was bad. And it was kind of inexplicable. And I think you're right. It's probably mostly in the headspace because he wasn't injured. He hadn't lost that physical ability. And the whole team was like that. As a result, like, Carolina was one of the most toxic cultures in the league. So Canales takes the job and it starts badly. Like, Carolina in the first month of the season was not fun to watch, and Bryce was painful. It was basically like, stop it, put him out of his misery, put him on the bench. I don't want to see that anymore. It's tough to watch. And I know Carolina fans know what we're talking about. Andy Dalton comes on. By the way, the Andy Dalton car wreck is not a euphemism. He was actually in a car wreck.
Yeah, no, that was a real thing that happened.
Yeah. That was a real thing that happened. Have to clarify. But Bryce comes back, and I think there couldn't probably, outside of the building, been lower expectations around the league. It's like, yeah, but he looked terrible a month ago. What could you have possibly done in a month? Funny thing happened. Bryce Young starts playing well. The team starts rallying. Like, the team starts believing in a quarterback who's played really poorly since he arrived in the city. And the new coach starts going, yeah, sure, I meant it. And everybody believes him. Like, that just doesn't happen in the NFL. That is exceptional stuff. And that's why we wanted to talk about Canales, because he's done it 3 times in a row. Now as a head coach, it's a huge jump. We talk about it all the time. Coordinator to head coach is a massive increase in responsibilities. Not everybody handles it really well. Canales has been ultra smooth. Like, I'll have what he's having, whatever that is, like whatever makes him that way. I wish I could get like a little Christmas sprinkle of that, because it is amazing what he's done with that city, that football culture, that quarterback. All of it's working. Like, everything's turning to gold. It's crazy.
Also, shout out, by the way, to Jalen Coker. One of my early draft season favorites. Like, we saw him at Shrine last January, and I think we talked about him in January that week. And I was like, Jalen Coker, Holy Cross. This kid's awesome, right? He tweaked his calf, so we didn't really get to see him for a huge portion of the pre-draft process because he was coming back from that. But God, I loved him so much. Ends up going undrafted to Carolina, and I was like, man, I thought he was going to get picked, but it's all right. He went to a good spot where, you know, he's going to have an opportunity to compete for a job. And not only has he competed for the job, but he won a job, and he's been one of the 10 most productive rookie receivers in the NFL as a UDFA. And he's put up some highlights on tape that are like special. So shout out to Canales for developing Jalen Coker and Jatavian Sanders and Chuba. And, you know, they have a collection of young skill players there that are legitimately very fun to watch that also don't get attention, you know, unless you play fantasy football. So it's kind of, I don't want to call Carolina like the island of misfit toys. It's more like the island of forgotten toys. They're not a very good team this year. Give it like 18 months and they could be a really, really good team because the culture is being established. The talent is not that far off. They need some pieces on defense, but offensively, they're not that far off. Like, I think the future is extremely, extremely bright there.
Yeah, they've got a new GM as well. And like you said, they need a lot of help on defense. And their best defensive player has been out all year. Their second best defensive player or defensive leader certainly has been out for much of the year. And they've been getting it done on that side of the ball with what they have as well as they can. But a big draft restock on defense, they've already spent all the picks, as you said, on offense. Needed to get those guys developed, and they were not developing in that culture. Like, not all those picks showed up this year. A bunch of them showed up last year and the year before. Young offensive linemen we liked, who had an okay rookie campaign and a terrible sophomore campaign last year. And we were just like, they didn't suddenly get awful. They didn't get bad. It's still there. And it's all working. All those young players are developing. So I think it might happen even a little bit faster than that, depending on what they can get for that defense in free agency in the draft. This could be one of those things that turns around really, really quickly. And as a Bears fan, team that's facing a coaching change, these are the situations that give me hope. Your Texans, Canales' Panthers, like, think about how bad it was not very long ago, less than a year ago. And look at it now and look at the future and how it feels and how you feel about the team and how they're performing on the field. It's completely different. So if you get the right guys in those spaces, things can go really, really well, really, really quickly, just the same as if you get the wrong coaches in those spaces. It can go really, really poorly, really, really quickly. But there is hope there. Canales is proof of that. He's done a tremendous job in Carolina. Panthers fans should be very optimistic about the future of their team.
Speaking of the Bears, by the way, one side note.
Oh, God, don't.
You will never be able to convince me that Ben Johnson calling a fake fumble shot play on Y-League was not him looking up to Kevin Warren and saying, I'm right here. Come and get me. You want to do fun shit too? I'll call it for you. And Caleb the whole time was like, don't throw a pick. Don't throw a pick. That's going to be my new boss. Like, don't throw a pick. Don't throw a pick. I want him to come here. Please, please, please. It felt like both Caleb and Ben were like interviewing for each other. It was great. Loved it. Like, Bears are not a good team, but
right.
I mean, at least they have a rookie quarterback that is behind in every game and hasn't thrown a pick since week 8. I mean, that's something, right?
That's literally at this point the only thing. They almost lost their left tackle long term yesterday. So, yeah, not great things going for the Bears, but they are facing a choice very similar to a lot of these other teams. And again, if they get it right, if they get the right guy in there, if that's Ben Johnson or whoever it is, it can turn around really quickly, and that is so needed in a place like Chicago, and Carolina is proof that it can happen and happen quickly.
All right, well, hope you guys enjoyed this little short and sweet episode for you today. Again, it's holiday week. Schedules are wonky. Next week's schedule is also going to be wonky because it's also a holiday week and also my wife's birthday. And also, we're going to be out of town doing hiking for my wife's birthday. So I don't know what we're doing next week. We're going to figure it out when we get there. Either way, playoffs are almost here. The Week 18 slate is shaping up to be a very, very consequential one. Very possible we get a Vikings versus Lions Sunday night game to decide the 1 seed. So we'll see where we're at as we approach the end of the season and talk about all of the most pressing issues once we cross that bridge. So thank you once again for watching and listening, wherever you happen to be watching and listening. Thank you to all of our executive producers. Thank you to Homage. Thank you to Underdog. I truly hope that you guys have a great holiday with your family and friends, whatever you happen to celebrate, wherever you happen to celebrate. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to us, on such a crazy, hectic week. So with that, see you guys soon, and until next time, later.